Hey everybody, this is Russ from Metro Game Core. Today we're going to review a handheld PC. It's the Lenovo Legion Go S. Now, I first got my hands on this thing a few months ago when I was at CES, and now I finally got a review unit from Lenovo. This is on loan, I've had it for about a week at this point, but I am ready to share my thoughts about it. Now, this handheld has been somewhat controversial over the past couple months. A lot of people have hot takes about it, and I've got a couple hot takes of my own, and the bottom line is that I think that the bones of this handheld are really good. Like, it feels good to hold, the controls are excellent, it has some really excellent screen specs as well. It basically lines up exactly with what I would expect from a handheld PC in 2025. However, the processor, the power and performance, as well as the price and value do not make sense to me, and that's what we're going to unpack in this video. There's a lot to digest because there are going to be 5 Legion Go's coming out this year, 4 of them with the Legion Go S brand to them, so they'll have this really nice bones and shell to them, but then also just the regular Legion Go 2, which will be coming out later this year as well. And when you try to balance things like the processor and pricing, especially even versus their previous Legion Go model, everything just kind of starts to fall apart. And so in this video, I want to talk about why you would even want to buy the Legion Go S and which one may be a good fit for you. And spoiler alert, I don't think that any of the Legion Go S's, including this one, are a very good fit compared to what you can find from other companies and from Lenovo themselves. We got a lot to unpack here, so grab a snack and drink and let's go ahead and get started. Okay, I think first thing we need to talk about is the pricing and overall spec sheet for the Legion Go S. And this is going to get pretty confusing because we have so many other models to choose from. There are going to be 4 different Legion Go S models, and the one we're reviewing today is on the bottom right here. It's the only one that's actually available right now. The other ones will be coming out next month. Now, there are some similarities between all 4 of these devices. The shells are very similar. They're going to have the same screen as well as the same battery. But there are other differences. For example, the dark models will come with SteamOS, but the ones down below will come with Windows. In addition, the 2 models on the right will have the more budget-minded Z2 Go chipset, whereas the ones on the left, we're going to have the Z1 Extreme, the exact same chip that we had in the original Legion Go, as well as on other handhelds like the ROG Ally. Now, I'm going to be throwing out a lot of different chipset names throughout this video, so let's kind of make a quick rundown of everything that we have available. So looking at the chart here, let's go from bottom to top. So the very first one here is the Ryzen Z1. This one came out alongside the Z1 Extreme, which you see above, but it was only available in one model of the ROG Ally. This one is a much less powerful chipset. It has 6 CPU cores and 12 threads, and then only 4 GPU cores. Meanwhile, the Z1 Extreme, which you can find in the original Legion Go, had 8 CPU cores, 16 threads, as well as 12 GPU cores compared to 4 on the Z1. And so the Z1 Extreme is still a very capable APU in today's environment. It is still kind of the gold standard when it comes to PC handhelds. And it does give you a tangible performance improvement over devices like the Steam Deck, even though that one is a bit more efficient. Now, the Z2 Go, which is found in the device we're reviewing here today, is essentially a pared-down version of the 6800U chipset, which came out about 3 years ago. They also stripped out some of the CPU cores, so now it only has 4 cores and 8 threads, and even though it does have 12 graphics cores, they're from an older version of Zen 3 Plus. And then finally, the 2 above it are the Z2, which is essentially just a rename of the Z1 Extreme, and then we have the Z2 Extreme, which will be in the Legion Go 2. We haven't really seen this one in the wild just yet. So we're going to go and touch on performance difference between these chips later in the video, but I just wanted to go over those names really quickly and kind of set the stage. So the Z2 Go, which we're using here in today's model, only has 4 cores and 8 threads, and 12 graphics cores that are a little bit older. And so even though the Z2 Go is a new chipset, it really is based off of something that's about 3 years old at this point, and it's pared down from that as well. And so let's go back to this quadrant here and take a look at the 2 on the right. These both are using that Z2 Go or 6800U chipset. The one up top, which is in a darker color that they're calling Nebula, this one is the first handheld to release that's going to be shipping with SteamOS officially. So it's going to have the same OS experience as the Steam Deck, which is pretty awesome. Now, the one on the top right also has a couple component differences. It only has 16 gigabytes of RAM and 512 gigabytes of storage. Meanwhile, the one we're reviewing today on the bottom right has 32 gigs of RAM and a terabyte of storage, so it does have increased specs in that way. However, when we're talking about a more budget-minded chipset like this, You know, the difference between 16 and 32 gigabytes of RAM is not going to make a lot of difference when it comes to gaming. And I'm of the opinion too that, the difference between 512 and a terabyte of storage is not that big either, because all these devices have micro SD card slots. I have a hard time believing that a Windows license, 16 gigs of RAM and 512 gigabytes of storage actually costs Lenovo $180. It feels like they are pushing that cost over to the customer and using it as a reason to charge them more. Now the two on the left are a little bit different. They both will have 32 gigs of RAM and a terabyte of storage, but they will have the Z1 Extreme chip, which is the same one in the original Legion Go. And again here, looking at the price differences, it starts to get really wonky. Like, I can kind of see a $100 price difference between the one on the bottom right versus the one on the bottom left. I would much rather spend an additional $100 to get that much better chipset. But then again, when I look at the two SteamOS versions, it starts to make less sense for me because there's a $200 price difference between them. Yes, the one on the top left has more RAM and more storage, which again, I would say is arguably not going to be that big of a factor, but that $200 price difference versus a $100 price difference is kind of crazy to me. And then again, if we look at the two on the left, there's an $80 price difference between the two, and the only difference is that the one on the bottom left has a Windows license where the other one doesn't. And so I hope that you were thoroughly confused like I am at this point, because it is crazy that they have 4 different SKUs coming out, and these prices are all over the place, and they don't make a lot of sense to me. These OEMs can get RAM and storage for a lot cheaper than just buying them off the shelf, but why are they charging us these premium prices for these specs that are not going to make a huge difference with some of these chipsets? And that doesn't even account for the fact that it's $729 on its own for this Legion Go S that has the Z2 Go chip in it, which is a 6800U that's been pared down. It costs only $20 less than the Legion Go that has the Z1 Extreme in it. So even within their pricing year over year, it makes less sense to me as well. Now, there are some elements that are the same between all 4 of these models, including the screen and the battery. The screen is 8 inches, 1200p resolution with a 16:10 aspect ratio and a 120 Hz variable refresh rate. The VRR kicks in at 48 Hz and goes all the way up to 120. What that means is that as long as you're playing a game and it's getting at least 48 frames per second and above, all of those changes in frame rate are going to feel very smooth. In addition, they all have the same battery, 55.5 watt hours. Now let's talk about the device itself in terms of hardware and what you can expect from this $730 price point. And I think we should start with the overall design because this is very different than the original Legion Go, which had detachable controllers. This one is just one solidly built single handheld. Now the overall design kind of looks and feels like an Xbox controller in terms of like offset analog sticks, easy access to all the controls. The texture of the plastic is excellent. It's got this nice ribbing around the back of it, and then it also has it on the front as well. And so it's very grippy, and the plastic itself kind of has a soft texture to it. And so everything just feels very comfortable to hold. And in terms of ergonomic grip, we've got a lot to work with here. Not only are the grips themselves large and kind of bulbous, but they also flare down here at the bottom, which makes it very comfortable to hold. In fact, this may be one of the more roomy feeling handhelds. If you've got larger hands, I think you may really enjoy just the overall feel of holding this device in general. So let's talk about the controls, and there are some very good things here and a couple things I wish were better. Let's start with the analog sticks. These are actually really good. They're a little bit smaller than like a full controller sticks, but they still feel very large and nice and smooth. They've got an excellent range of motion to them, and yeah, they just feel very precise and good, and I think the placement and just the overall ergonomics are really complementary, and so I've definitely enjoyed using these analog sticks. Even though they are a little bit smaller than a full controller sticks, I've never found myself wishing that they were bigger. I think they're just a perfect size for a handheld. I've also come to appreciate this D-pad. It's got a shield-style design to it, so it's just one single piece and it just kind of pivots around, but it has a rubber membrane feel to it, and it has these little soft clicks in any direction you go in. And so I found this to be pretty accurate. If I need to press up, down, left, and right, it's very easy because I can feel it with my finger, but then also I can hit the diagonals very easily as well. Some of my typical tests include the contra test. So here what I like to do is press down on the D-pad and then rock it left and right and see how much my character moves. Ideally, if I'm going to move it just a little bit, I would expect the character not to move, but if I need to rock it all the way to one side or the other, I do expect the character to move, and that's exactly what's happening here with this D-pad. So as far as I'm concerned, this does pass the contra test. I am able to hit hit the diagonals when I want to and then miss them when I don't want to. On the other hand, I like to also test with Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. So what I'm doing here is just testing on how easy it is to do a Hadouken and Shoryuken and all those quarter circle and half circle moves. And so the idea here is that I want to make sure I can hit the diagonal when I really want to. And it's definitely working here. In full disclosure, I am not the best at playing these games with a shield style D-pad like this, but after a couple rounds, I got used to it. And so yes, I think this will be excellent for fighting game fans as well. In addition, when trying to play a precision platformer, something like Celeste, which, the difference between a diagonal and not hitting a diagonal can be life or death, it still feels very good for me here as well. So I think just in general, this is a good D-pad. It might take some acclimating to, depending on what you're used to in terms of, a cross style or a shield style D-pad, but overall, I think they did a good job here. Now up top, we've got a couple menu buttons here. And so these two on the very top are going to be your Legion Go Space buttons. So this one will bring up like the full Legion Go Space. This one on the top right will bring up like this one right here, which is just like your quick menu. So you can toggle between like performance mode, stuff like that. Below that, we have our select and start buttons. And I will say that one thing that has annoyed me about this whole setup is that I kind of wish they were the other way around, because I often find that when I'm playing, I just naturally go up to the very top for select and start. And unfortunately, there is nothing in the software right now that allows you to swap these out. And so that's really kind of disappointing to me, because the original Legion Go software actually allowed you to swap out which ones were the menu buttons. Here we don't have that luxury. Hopefully it's something that they can adjust in the software in the future, but for now I've just been trying to train myself to remember that this is select and start. And after a week, I'm still missing these inputs all the time. Now on the right side, we've got some interesting stuff. Before we get to the face buttons, let's talk about this little mouse pad. So this is kind of like a mini trackpad, and you can kind of move it around. You can see it's moving the mouse cursor, and you can either tap on it or you can actually click it down to do a mouse click. You can also do a long click, which will simulate a right mouse click. You see how I brought up the menu right there. For the most part, I have not used this trackpad that much. I like that it's small and kind of out of the way, but if I really need to get to something on the screen, I found that with an 8-inch screen, it's just as easy for me to actually just tap on the screen to bring something up. So I think that your mileage will vary on this thing, but for me personally, I just kind of forgot that it was there. Now let's talk about these face buttons, which I think are pretty good. They are relatively large, all things considered, and they are glossy and a little bit flat. Now when actually pressing the button, it's even better because they don't have a lot of travel to them. You can see when you press it down, it doesn't go that far. In addition, they are relatively quiet and don't have a lot of play to them, so they don't wiggle around, so they feel very solid. I really enjoy using these face buttons. In particular, I like using them with button mashing style games, something like Hades, where you're just pushing on those buttons so fast. It's been a really excellent fit for me. Let's talk about these shoulders and triggers, which I think have overall a bit of an Xbox style design to them, especially these bumpers. You can see that they're pretty easy to press down on, but a little bit on the loud side. But still, I love the fact that they are very easy to press down on no matter where you are on the button. The triggers are also very solid, but don't have a lot of travel to them. This is about as far as they will go down. Again, this means that it's pretty easy to press down on them, but if you're really looking for a huge range of motion between 0 and 100, it doesn't really have it. In addition, on the back, we have a hair trigger flip. So if we flip this over, it really will only go down that far to press down. So it's a digital input at that point. This will be really good for like shooting games where you don't need to press it all the way down. You just need to shoot as fast as possible. So that's a really good toggle right there. In general, I've just been using the default analog toggle, even for games that don't require an analog input, just because the travel is so light, I just don't really notice. And so I've enjoyed just having it like this. Also in the back, we've got Y1 and Y2, which are programmable back buttons. And these work pretty well, but they're relatively clicky and somewhat hard to press down on. Up top, we've got our fan ventilation and then 2 USB-C ports. These are both full USB 4, 40 gigabit per second. Then we have our headphone jack, volume up and down, and then our power button. Now of note, the fan can get pretty loud, especially in performance mode. I'm actually running it at full speed right now, so hopefully you can hear it while I'm talking. But essentially, this is something that has a nice whooshing kind of sound to it. It definitely works in terms of cooling, but I think it gets about as loud as a Steam Deck. Personally, I don't really mind it. I kind of like it when machines sound like machines, but if this is something that bothers you, you want something that runs very quietly, this is definitely not the device to get, especially because with this lower powered chipset, you're going to be using performance mode more often than not. And so again, this is what it sounds like at full blast, and then I will turn it off so you can hear the difference between the two. And so there you go. That's the difference between performance mode running at max speed versus the power saving mode. Now on the back, you can see we got lots of ventilation, and thankfully, all this stuff happens without actually touching your hands. So your hands will stay relatively cool. In all the testing that I did, I never felt this device get like hot or anything because, the air will come in through here and then out through the top. And then my hands are here on the sides. No issues whatsoever. One of the nicer things about having a larger device. And then finally on the bottom, all we have is our micro SD card slot. And that is it. Now let's talk about these two front firing speakers as well as the screen and kind of the whole experience of using that. Number one, I love the fact that we have front firing speakers here, especially because the original Legion Go had top firing speakers, which I always thought were crazy. Now, in terms of audio quality, I would say that it is not great out of the box. It seems just kind of muffled in the fact that the bass tones are not really there, and even the high notes are hard to hear. Let me give you a listen. So in general, it just sounds somewhat muted, and even this is at 100% volume, and it doesn't get quite as loud as I would like. Now, thankfully, there is a very, very easy fix for it with an app called FX Sound. Now, I've talked about this in my other videos, including my other Legion Go videos. This is a very easy app to use. It's a quick download, completely free, and once you have it installed, it's just going to show up here. Every time you start up Windows, it's going to auto work. And even with the default preset, it enhances the sound a lot. So let me give you a quick example here after installing it and just using the default preset. So it took me like 2 seconds to set this up. And so yes, I think you can probably hear there is a night and day difference between the two. So I would say that the audio is actually pretty decent once you install FX Sound. Before that, it is a little bit muted. So now let's talk about this screen in terms of just overall quality, but then also while we're at it, let's talk about the size difference between this and the Steam Deck OLED as well as the original Legion Go. So let's start with the Steam Deck versus the Legion Go S. So the Steam Deck has a 7.4-inch display versus 8 on the Legion Go S, but they have the same aspect ratio. And you can see that the screen size is quite a bit bigger on the Legion Go, despite the fact that this device is about the same size as the Steam Deck. The Steam Deck is wider, but not quite as tall, and I think between the two, they both feel very spacious and roomy, but the Legion Go S definitely feels a little bit more roomy. And when we look at the color difference between the two, I think it's pretty obvious that the Steam Deck OLED has richer and more vibrant colors compared to the other. And that makes sense to me because the Legion Go S has an LCD panel versus OLED on the Steam Deck. However, I was also surprised to find that the original Legion Go had better richness and colors than the Legion Go S as well. These are both LCD panels, but I would say that the original Legion Go just has a little bit more pop to it. Also, in terms of overall size, you can see that the Legion Go is quite a bit bigger. It's both wider and taller. And when we go to 100% brightness, I think that the original Legion Go is also brighter than the Legion Go S. Not by much, the Legion Go S still has 500 nits peak brightness, so it is quite a bright display, but the Legion Go original does seem to be brighter. On the flip side, if we go down to 0% brightness, the Legion Go S is quite a bit dimmer. So if you are looking for a handheld specifically to play in the dark, then the Legion Go S would be a better fit. Now, even though we've got a good idea between the overall sizes between these two devices, let's now talk about weight, because that is a big factor as well. The Legion Go S weighs 740 grams compared to the Steam Deck OLED at 658. So there's about an 80 gram difference between the two. And even the ROG Ally X, which has an 80 watt-hour battery, is still about 60 grams lighter than the Legion Go S. Now, the thing about the Legion Go S is that even though it is a relatively heavy handheld, it doesn't feel very heavy because it is well distributed, because it's a larger handheld. And so across the week of using this handheld, there was never a moment where I thought that it was uncomfortably heavy. In fact, I kept marveling at how light it was for its size. And it is still about 150 grams lighter than the original Legion Go, which I think is a quite heavy handheld. handheld. So all this together really says to me that it actually is a very comfortable handheld. It's got a pretty good screen, but not the best, and the audio is pretty great once you make some adjustments to it. And so I found this device to be relatively comfortable to use and an excellent size. And so this is what I meant when I said this thing's got good bones. It feels very good. It doesn't feel overly heavy, very comfortable to hold, excellent controls, and it has a decent screen. Like, I like that it's 8 inches and 1200p and 120 hertz. Those are all very good specs. It could be better. Like, it could get a little bit brighter. The colors could be a little bit better. You know, it could be like OLED or whatever. But I think for 120 hertz VRR, this is a good screen. Now, the thing is, the way a device feels is only like 1/3 of the story. You know, yes, this feels very good, but then we also have to factor in performance as well as price. So let's talk about those next. Now, I could probably, or really definitely, make an entire dissertation about all the chipsets we have within the AMD space when it comes to handhelds. But I did want to just give a quick rundown and set our expectations for the Z2 Go chip that we're going to be using in today's model. Like I mentioned earlier, it's a pared down version of an older chipset from 3 years ago, the 6800U. But this one has fewer cores and threads, only 4 cores and 8 threads on the CPU. So one thing to keep in mind is that there's a big CPU difference between the Z2 Go and the Z1 Extreme models. And then also the graphics performance will not be the same either. And if we look at synthetic benchmarks, that all kind of falls into place. So looking at today's model here, it got a score of 2430. And also pay attention to the graphics and CPU scores that we can see underneath the times by character, 2275 and 3971. Now going over to the previous model, the original Legion Go, you can see that this actually has a better score despite the fact that the price difference between the two is negligible. The overall score as well as the graphics score are slightly higher, but that CPU score is quite a bit bigger. And that, of course, is because this one has 8 cores and 16 threads. So even just looking at a very basic times by benchmark, you can see that yes, the original Z1 Extreme outperforms the Z2 Go by quite a bit. Now let's jump over to actual game testing. We'll start with Cyberpunk 2077. Here I'm running the Legion Go S in performance mode, the Legion Go in performance mode, and then the Steam Deck just kind of does what it needs to for every game. It is worth noting that the Legion Go S performance mode is a 25-watt TDP, but on the original Legion Go, it was only a 20-watt TDP. Now for this game, I did 2 tests. Number 1 is just running the in-game benchmarks, and then also just taking an average of the actual gameplay as I was playing it. If we look at the benchmark, you can see that the Legion Go S is getting outperformed by the original Legion Go, but does crawl a bit ahead of the Steam Deck, and all 3 of these are using the default Steam Deck preset at 800p. But when we get to actual gameplay and looking at the average frames per second, you can see that the Legion Go S starts to fall behind the others. And again, these are all 3 running in the exact same settings, but bear in mind that the Legion Go S is requiring more power. It's got a 25-watt TDP compared to the others. Now, when getting into actual gameplay of Cyberpunk 2077, I did not find it to be a very good time. Number 1, in order to get an average of 40 frames per second, I had to run it in performance mode with 800p resolution and that Steam Deck preset. And with an 8-inch screen, you can definitely see the chunkiness of these pixels. Not only that, the gameplay itself was relatively stuttery. Like, I often found myself just having little hiccups here and there as I was playing it. So it just wasn't that great of a time in the overall gameplay experience. Everything looked really muddy, but then also, you know, it just didn't really perform in a smooth manner either. Not only that, when you push it at a 25-watt TDP, it's going to pull about 37 watts from the battery. And like we mentioned before, this is a 55.5 watt-hour battery. That means we're going to get about an hour and a half of gameplay. So not only is playing Cyberpunk 2077 a worse experience in terms of graphics as well as just overall performance, you're only going to be able to do it for about an hour and a half. Now, to be fair, the original Legion Go only plays for about an hour and a half as well because it has a smaller battery, but the surprising part is that the Steam Deck, which still performs better in terms of average frames per second, actually gives me about 2 hours and 15 minutes of battery life when playing the same game. Let's take a look at another game with a very similar setup. So let's do Rise of the Tomb Raider, because this one has in-game benchmarks and we can also test it with gameplay. And again, same performance mode settings with 25 watts on the Legion Go S and 20 watts on the Legion Go. I'm also running the game at 800p and medium settings. That way it all matches the resolution of the Steam Deck at the very least. Now, I was surprised to find in the benchmark that the Steam Deck pulled ahead of the others. This may have to just do with optimizations with this chipset because the Steam Deck has been around for so long, but either way, you can see there's quite a big difference between the 3. Now, between the 2 Legion Go's, they're about neck and neck, but when we get into gameplay, you can see that the Legion Go pulls ahead all the way up to a pretty stable 60 frames per second. Both the Steam Deck and the Legion Go S will hit 60 frames per second, but it'll also take some massive dips during some action sequences, so I just kind of gave them an average of 55 just because of all those dips. And in terms of battery life, it was about the same experience as well, about an hour and a half with the Legion Go S, and again about an hour and a half with the Legion Go, but 2 hours and 15 minutes with the Steam Deck. And so again, we're looking at the Legion Go S kind of falling into third place. It's not going to get the same stable frame rates as the original Legion Go, and it's not going to get the battery life of the Steam Deck. But all things considered, it is a very playable game. The only thing to look out for are going to be those dips, and unfortunately, some of those dips will even go below 48 frames per second, and so you will definitely feel those stutters as they happen. So now let's just kind of go through and play some games and kind of do best case scenario to worst case scenario when it comes to battery life and overall performance. Now, one thing worth noting before we jump into all those details is that we've got two major power modes here on the Legion Go S. Power saving and performance, and so you can basically toggle between the two. Performance mode will go up to a TDP of about 25 watts, whereas power saving will go about 10 or 11. So there is a wide gap between the two in terms of performance mode, so let's talk about some of the games that you can play in power saving, but for the most part you'll probably have to be playing in the second one. When playing lightweight games, things like Balatro and Stardew Valley, these can be easily played in power saving mode, and they look great. We've got that big 8-inch screen, 1200p resolution, and so when you're playing very lightweight games like this, you can expect to get over 3 hours of battery life, and it's going to be an excellent experience. You've got these really good controls, big old screen, ergonomic grips, all this stuff comes together really well. It's going to be up to you whether or not you think paying $730 to play lightweight indie games like this is going to be worth it, but we'll talk about price a little bit more here in a moment. Now, one of the nice things about having that variable refresh rate is that even if you're playing a game that will dip down below 60 frames per second, you often won't notice it. For example, here I'm playing Hades at 1200p with the default settings, and I'm using it in power saving mode, and it actually works really well. I'm getting over 3 hours of battery life with this mode, and even though it is dipping below 60 frames per second, I am hardly noticing as I'm playing it. Now let's say that you actually can feel that difference and you don't really like it and you want to have a very smooth gameplay. Well, at that point you've only really got one other option unless you make your own custom profiles. So let's say we turn on performance mode. And Hades is one of those games that will eat up as much power as it possibly can. So even capping this at 60 frames per second, you can see that it's still pulling a much higher wattage. And so at this point, it's kind of treating itself like a AAA game. It's got a 25 watt TDP, and it's pulling about 36-37 watts from total system power. This means that instead of getting over 3 hours of battery life in power saving mode, we're now only getting that standard hour and a half when we play it in performance mode. So it's really going to be up to you and whether or not you can feel the difference between, 56 and 60 frames per second on a variable refresh rate screen, or if you want to have something very smooth and you don't mind that you can only play for an hour and a half. Now for other games, it's not going to be much of a choice. For example, with Octopath Traveler. This is a game, again, that will take a lot of power if you allow it to. And so here, even at 1200p medium settings, it's going to go full tilt to get you a stable 60 frames per second. And again, that's going to give you about an hour and a half of battery life when we're pulling a full 37 watts of system power. Now, if we jump over to power saving mode, we can get 3.5 hours of battery life, but the performance will actually tank. It's going to average about 30 frames per second and even dip down to like 26 here or there, and it becomes just kind of a stuttery and slow mess. So at this point, I would not say this game is playable in power saving mode. So your only choice at that point is to play it in performance mode and basically push it as much as you can, and again, live with that 1 hour and 30 minutes of battery life. Another thing to bear in mind is that yes, you can play these games at 120 frames per second if you can actually get the performance to that point, but just bear in mind that it's going to eat away at the battery as well. And so even some lightweight games like Horizon Chase Turbo, which does support 120 frames per second, is going to require a lot of power to get up to there. So about an hour and 44 minutes of total battery life when playing this game. I think that for the vast majority of PC games that you can play on this device, basically everything except for lightweight indie titles, it's going to require you to play in performance mode, and you should just expect to only get about an hour and a half of battery life. For example, with Stray, I got an average about 40 to 42 frames per second at 1200p low settings, It's playable, but not the most enjoyable experience, and definitely not super smooth. But I, again, got about an hour and a half of battery life because this is the best that the chip could do. Same thing with like Xbox 360 era games, like BioShock Infinite here. 1200p medium settings, I can get a pretty stable 60 frames per second, but again, I'm only going to be able to play for about an hour and a half because I am pushing the chip to its max. When you're trying to play something that's more demanding, say Ghost of Tsushima, you're going to have to drop down the resolution and drop down the settings and try to find that middle ground to actually make the game playable. So here on average, I got about 35 to 38 frames per second, and again, we're pushing this CPU to the max. I'm only getting an hour and a half of battery life. And so that's kind of where you are with higher end games. You can drop them down a bunch and get them to look really murky, and they might be playable. But if you try to get them to the point where I would consider it to be enjoyable, like 1080p low settings with God of War, it's really going to struggle to even get 30 frames per second consistently. In this example here, it really was pretty sluggish as I was playing it, to the point where I would probably rather just play something else. Again, we're only going to get about an hour and a half of battery life because this is pushing the CPU to the max, and this is kind of the cap of what you can expect from this chipset. Instead, what I found myself doing more often than not throughout the week is that after doing some testing, I got really bored with it, and instead, I would just start streaming from another computer over to this one. It's a really enjoyable device to use in terms of controls and ergonomics and screen. It's just the fact that it struggles to play a lot of the games that I wanted to play. But I did find it to be a very capable streaming handheld. Here I'm using Moonlight streaming from my ROG Flow Z13, and I'm playing this game at 1080p original settings here, and I'm getting it, close to like 80, 90 frames per second streamed. Not only that, it doesn't require a lot of battery to do game streaming, so I'm getting over 3 hours of battery life. And so for me, this is the most enjoyable experience with the Legion Go S, is to actually just stream PC games from another PC, which says a lot about this chipset. Let's do one more example. So this is Marvel's Spider-Man. So I'm playing this at 1200p low settings with FSR turned on, which means that it is using sub-scaling in order to achieve this good performance. And I'm playing this game with a locked 30 frames per second, and even then it is dipping down below that. Maybe really only to about 28 frames per second, but I do feel those little stutters as I'm playing. It's definitely a playable experience, but not quite as enjoyable as I would like. And again, streaming the same game just gives me a much better experience. I can play it at the exact native resolution of 1200p with low settings. I can turn off the FSR, and now I'm getting, again, about 80, 90 frames per second. On top of that, I can play this for over 3 hours because streaming is not as demanding. And so for me, this has been like unlocking a secret code to the Legion Go S, is that instead of actually playing games on the device, I've been streaming it from other PCs that I have around. Obviously, this requires you to have a PC to stream from, but this has been the most enjoyable experience for me. Whether or not that's worth $729 to have that experience, that's going to be up to you. We will talk more about price in a bit. Before that, I wanted to close out with a little bit of talk about emulation. There are some good and bad things when it comes to retro gaming on this handheld. Number one, it's got a 16:10 aspect ratio display, which means that 4:3 content like Super Nintendo is going to look great. It almost fills up the entire screen. In addition, because the screen has a 120 Hz refresh rate, we can turn on features like black frame insertion to give us really nice motion clarity. And so when it comes to playing retro games via RetroArch and whatnot, this is actually a really nice experience. Now when it comes to higher end systems, let's start with like PS2 and GameCube. This also will work pretty well. You'll have to put it into performance mode, but you can still play games at like a 3x resolution, but again, it's going to max out that CPU. So you can expect to get about an hour and a half of gameplay when playing PS2 and GameCube and pushing it to the max. From there, I wanted to test out, the higher end emulation systems like PS3 and Xbox 360. For PS3, there are some games that run pretty well. For example, Demon's Souls, I would say, is totally playable. It does dip down below 60 frames per second here or there, but I would say it's still an enjoyable experience. However, once you get past that, I started to see a lot of cracks. For example, with Dead or Alive 5, I got quite a bit of stutters and sub 60 frames per second gameplay. This is one of the more easy to play games on this system, so this was a red flag for me right here. Once I got into 3D based titles, things like Ratchet and Clank Quest for Booty and Prince of Persia, yes, things started to dip down quite a bit. The thing about RPCS3, which is the emulator that I'm using right now, it does require a lot of cores and threads. And I think that once you get up to 3D based games, then you can really see the difference. And so I would consider something like Prince of Persia to be unplayable. So long story short, when it comes to PS3, there are going to be some games that are playable, but I would say the majority are going to struggle. I had similar results with Xbox 360. There were some lightweight games like Blue Dragon that actually were pretty good, and so I could see myself playing through this game on this system. And surprisingly, it doesn't demand too much of the CPU as well, so I was able to get over 2 hours of battery life with Blue Dragon in particular. Now again, when we start to push it into the harder to play games, things like Crackdown and Too Human and Forza Horizon, all these are more 3D based, and they definitely will start to struggle. All three of these games had all sorts of dips here and there. It's really going to come down to your tolerance of what you're able to accept when it comes to stuttering and slowdown when playing some of these games. But at least in terms of my own standards, I wouldn't want to play any of these games on the Xbox 360, at least on the Z2 Go chip. There are going to be lightweight games like Blue Dragon that do just fine, but again, I think the majority of them are going to struggle to keep up. So I would not consider this to be a PS3 or Xbox 360 capable handheld. Now, one thing I've seen from a lot of people who have been reviewing this device is they've been wiping Windows and putting Bazzite on it, which is, a version of SteamOS essentially, and that does improve the overall gameplay experience. Some people are able to get a little bit better performance by doing that, but in general, it's mostly about the user experience that gets a lot more streamlined because you don't have to worry about all that Windows junk. For my part, I decided not to test Bazzite because I think it's been thoroughly tested by others, but I had a couple other reasons for it as well. Number one is that at $729, I just can't see that justification in getting this model and then putting Bazzite on it when you're going to have a SteamOS model coming out in about a month that is going to be about $180 cheaper. Yes, the Steam version will have less RAM and less storage, but again, I don't think it has $180 less of those two categories. And then the other major part for me is that even though, yes, you may get a few frames per second better on Bazzite, it's not to the point of actually moving the needle in any way to make this more worth it. It's $730 versus $550 with the other one. I just don't see that price difference between the two, even when running Bazzite. The other part of it for me was that because we're going to be getting official SteamOS, I kind of wanted to wait to see how that is compared to a pure Windows experience like I've had over the past week. So I do want to talk more about Bazzite and SteamOS and the Legion Go S models, but I think that's going to have to wait until I get my hands on the other ones, if I get my hands on them, because you never know, Lenovo may hate me after making this video. Either way, I think at this point we have enough data to go and start wrapping up and talk about what I like and what I don't like about the Lenovo Legion Go S Windows Edition. I think the overall thing here is that it has very good bones. It's very comfortable, it has excellent controls, and the screen specs are really good. This is exactly what I want in a handheld in 2025. 8-inch, 16 by 10, 120 Hz variable refresh rate. That's awesome. I also think that it has decent audio with front-firing speakers. It does require you to install FX Sound, which only takes a couple minutes, and after that, yes, I was enjoying it. And I think the most unexpected thing for me is that this was awesome when it came to game streaming. I wasn't really expecting that. I was really going to try to test the performance of the CPU itself, but that performance was so bad, but the other specs were so good that it led me down that route instead. Now, in terms of what I don't like, I have quite a few remarks here. Number one, I think the pricing structure of the entire Legion Go S series is very confusing. We've got 4 different SKUs and prices that are all over the place that don't really make sense for the amount of value that you're going to get per chipset. I also found myself continually to expect only 90 minutes of battery life from this device, and that's because you mostly have to play all your games in performance mode, and even then, when playing performance mode, it's going to max out everything. And so when you max things out, you can expect 90 minutes, and when you play a game, you can expect to max things out. In all of my testing with the Legion Go S with the Z2 Go chipset, it felt like I was jumping into a time machine back to 2022. That was the year that we had the 6800U as our primary chipset for these handheld PCs, and the performance here was pretty similar, but a little bit worse too because we had fewer CPU cores and threads. And so part of my experience definitely was the fact that I just expect more in 2025, especially at this price point. And that's because despite trying as hard as I could to find a justification for the $730 price point of this machine, I just couldn't find it. I could not find a moment when this was a good value. There are some things that it does really well. I really enjoyed playing indie games on it, those that could get over 3 hours of battery life with excellent controls and everything played really smoothly, but that's only going to be for very lightweight games. In addition, I really enjoyed streaming on this device to the point where it's one of my favorite streaming experiences that I've ever had because the controls are so good, the screen is so big, like everything falls together really nicely. But that is where the buck stops for me because everything else felt like a huge compromise to the point where I just can't recommend this device because I'm not going to pay $730 to play indie games. I'm not going to pay $730 to play game streaming from another computer that you have to buy as well. And so that all doesn't make sense to me. If I had to put a number on it, I would say that the Z2 Go needs to go in handhelds that cost about $400. That seems to be a good fit for me. So again, going back to my intro here, asking why would you buy a Legion Go S, I don't have a very good answer, unless you really want to have that kind of streaming or indie game experience and price is not an object. For everybody else, I would say just wait and see if it goes on sale and gets to a price point that makes more sense to you. Or at the very least, maybe see if the Z1 Extreme models make more sense when they come out next month, because those at least will have performance that's expected in 2025. And so there you go. I think the Legion Go S has really excellent hardware. I love playing on this thing, and I'm a little bit sad that I'm going to be sending it back to Lenovo tomorrow. But it's not to the point where I'm actually going to go and buy it so I can have it myself, because I cannot justify $730 for a handheld that I mostly would use for streaming. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, and as always, thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.